All right, we are on. Thanks everybody for joining in, and those who are going to be watching this later. Welcome to the virtual brown bag. Let's get things rolling here. As usual, quick note, we are recording these meetings. So since we encourage people to be sharing things here, just make sure that whatever you're sharing is not going to get you in trouble later. The virtual brown bag is a place where we get together to share tips and tricks, experiences, frustrations, or difficulties, things that we are going through as we are learning it, or things that we've learned and we feel like sharing with others. This is a safe place to do that. Logistics, we do this every Thursday from 12 to 1 Central Time here on Skype until we outgrow the free offering that we have from Skype. Anybody who's willing to either share or learn or doing both are more than welcome to join in. Some people usually, join in as a listener first, and then as they see what kind of environment we have here, they start, unmuting themselves and talking, and that's what we keep encouraging people. Even though folks like myself and George, we tend to talk a lot, we're always bringing up, please unmute yourself, say your thoughts, otherwise you're going to be hearing crickets, and that's not the idea. Please just speak up, and we will shut up. Things that we've shared here before, we've been all over the place. It's really, from languages to frameworks to techniques to concepts to approaches to whatever, right? Anything really that you feel passionate about, either because you're feeling a lot of pain with whatever it is that you're going through, to something that you're really excited about, that you figure out how to make it work, or all the business cases that you could be using certain things. Bring it up, because it's however little something might be for you, it can be huge to somebody else. So don't be shy in sharing. We have the virtualbrownbag.com website, where you can always find a link to this meeting here. Oops. As well as the links to the previous videos with a little bit of a description, so that you know what we were up to on any given meeting. Other than that, let's roll. I'll just give two quick shout outs for the Improving Code user group that I host monthly. Next month, we're going to have this talk by my friend David Lewis, Crawling Out of the Mud from Monolith to Microservices Architecture. So if that's a topic that interests you, make sure to check it out. It's happening August 5th. And of course, the Improving virtual events, which are all free, and we have them every Friday. So check it out. There's always very interesting topics there that you can just register and check it out, or even watch it later once it becomes available on YouTube. As we're beyond that, last week when we were just about to close off the meeting, we're discussing communication issues or challenges or techniques or things that we definitely need from everybody who's involved into any kind of software development, right? It comes from the business to the POs, Scrum Masters, people writing the code, people testing the code. It's very important to have communication across those spectrums. And I've been talking to a lot of business-oriented folks, development-oriented folks, and the idea of communication came up with everybody. Either it's a lack of communication, or it's just a communication breakdown. Like, people think that they're communicating, they are writing up requirements, but then it's not really being understood by the receiving part. People are not on the same page, and this is a huge issue. So I thank you, George, for making this a topic for today. And whoever wanna kick us off, I do have some things that I can have some prompts for discussion, but I would like you folks to jump in and get this thing rolling.
So let's frame this. We're talking about specifically like communication techniques, right, and how to get better at it, and
right.
things you can do, right?
Yeah.
All right. I'll start by.
Yeah, just to add, maybe even before thinking about the techniques, maybe let's talk through the challenges. Like, why do we need a technique for that? Like, what are the challenges that we are trying to overcome?
I think I don't want to rehash what I kind of said last time too much. Dev is about communication and about communicating in multiple directions at once. You're commenting. I'm getting like a lot of echo feedback from someone. I'm not sure. I don't know if y'all hear it.
It sounds fine to me.
All right, whatever. That's cool.
I'm hearing it.
Oh,
Yeah.
You're hearing it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to have gone away now. So.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, I think that this is just kind of worth making a point. You're communicating to the computer and also to anyone that comes along after you or your team with your code all at the same time. And that's why I think it's super important to keep that first and foremost in your mind, because not only is this, how we maintain software and how we grow it by understanding what this person was thinking when they were writing that code, but it also is literally what it does, is how well it communicates it to the computer. So I think, I don't know, like on a basic level, I think that's why it's important. And that's just talking about code, not even other stuff.
Yeah, I definitely, we've been hearing this for a long time, code talks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, talk is cheap, show me the code. So it goes back and forth. I definitely think I'm the kind of person who believes that we should optimize code for readability first, even if it's not the most performant code, unless we do know that, hey, for this feature, performance is the most valuable thing. So write whatever you need to make the code as performant as possible. But really, from what I've learned, is if we start with readability, by the time we get to that one situation where, yes, this is a bottleneck, we need to make it more performant, we can then later, in a much easier way, understand what the code is doing and then optimize it from there. Now, if the code was poorly written to begin with, then, trying to optimize something that you cannot even understand what you're reading, it's much worse.
I do have a comment on that. I don't like talking about readability.
Okay.
I feel like talking about readability leads to just endless arguments, because readability is something that's going to be different for every single person. Everyone has their own standards on what they find readable, and furthermore, people are like really emotionally invested in it. Like I find anything that uses Hungarian notation unreadable, right?
Okay.
Why? But okay, I'm not gonna make you explain it because it's about you, right? Okay. There's no like natural tiebreaker there. You basically have to, anytime you run into an argument with that, you have to be running to your technical manager to make a call. Whereas I feel like if you focus, like as I do when I say, on how well it communicates the intent of the person writing it, then the person writing the code is the tiebreaker. Because like even in a code review, you can say, okay, well, this is, from my understanding about reading the code, this is what you're intending to do, and they can tell you yes or no. And if it communicated that poorly, then they probably should tweak that. So that's the specific reason why I prefer to talk about communicating intent rather than just readability.
Yes, I agree somewhat, but I don't think the tiebreaker would be the person writing the code. I would think that the tiebreaker is the team. How well does the team understand the intent behind the code written? So I've had situations where the developer, very well versed in ES6, for instance, wrote the most terse code in ES6 to implement the feature. But we spent like 30 minutes or so explaining to the team what the code was doing. At which point we said, you know what? Maybe that's the best way to write this ES6 code. But for the team, it takes the rest of the team too long to, go over that hump of, okay, what is this code doing again? Well, let's just take a step back then and make sure that, the team actually is comfortable with the code written, not the one person writing it.
But what I'm saying, I think, doesn't really conflict with that because what you're saying is they wrote that code and then people don't understand what it does, so it's not communicating their intent well, right? It is missing the communication stuff, and it's not like so. I'm not saying they're a tiebreaker in the sense of like this is what we're gonna do. I'm saying they're a tiebreaker in the sense of in like kind of the step before that sense, right?
Okay.
Of like, well, yeah, well, no. What you're saying, I is not even what I intended for it to say. Like
Okay.
it just gives a step before you go to the team vote or the tech lead or to make a call or something like that.
Okay.
In that it puts the focus on, oh, I meant for it to communicate this thing, but you're saying it communicated this other thing to you. So let's talk about either why that was your impression of the code or how I could adjust it to communicate the correct thing.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what about if we like step away from code a little bit? So before getting to actually writing code, we do need that communication with the business, with the PO, with the BA, whoever is giving us, the triggers for the solution that we're going to be building. What do you guys feel the challenges are there? And how do you go around it, or not around it? How do you improve it to streamline communication there?
Wait, you say that again? Sorry. Like,
So stepping away from communicating through code and the actual implementation, before we implement anything, we need to communicate with people, and usually like non-technical people, right? We're not thinking code, architecture, things, patterns. We're talking about hopefully understanding the business, the intent of the business for asking us, to implement those things. So what are the challenges there? Where do you normally find, trouble there? And how do you, improve that communication?
yeah, I've got thoughts. Anyone else want to jump in though? All right, so I'll start with this. There's good news there, in that it's that sort of communication is an abysmally low bar. Like it's so easy to do better than average at that. Like it basically you have to try any amount.
Okay.
Um, the so yeah, I think like as far as like communicating what product you want, so some of that is not going to come from you, right? That's going to come from others, like describing the problems they have. Um, I've actually, like I said, I've been kind of trying to to go through Javal Lowe's book, and I've been having some success. I feel like focusing on volatilities and extracting components from there, and then be like, okay, well, let's talk about each of these components in turn. Or is this? Well, actually, I'll start with this. Here's the first technique I think when talking about product or to a potential new client
Hmm.
is to state to them what you see their core business model is and have that conversation and be like, you know what, I had some time to think about it last night, and we're always talking about how you've got your delivery drivers and they're making deliveries, and people are placing orders and so on. But when I take a step back and look at it, it's not really about deliveries. It's really that's just kind of your current market strategy. Your service seems to be at its core really about chaining together service providers, and um, you say something like that, and you either get like you know an argument where they're like, no, I don't think that's really it, which is a really useful conversation where you get to see their point of view, and either you convince them or they convince you, and either way you win. Um, or they just slide up and are like, oh my god, I hadn't even thought of it before, but yes, that makes absolute sense. And you just like, bam, just establish so much more trust right out the bat, like an I get you sort of thing. So just stating what you think their core business value is, I think, has just to me worked really well.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I think that kind of goes to answer one of the questions, like what are some of the difficulties, is that like they're coming at you with a head of ideas and context, none of which you actually have. It's just in their head, and they're no better at communicating than anyone else, and they're going to start in the middle. So you pull them back to the beginning and be like, let's get on the same page about what we're doing. I've honestly never had a bad reaction from something like that.
Right. Yeah. Here's something like some feedback that's on some of the research I'm doing with like business folks, and how they trust or not trust their devs. Here's like verbatim something that we got back. I don't trust devs to understand what I build unless I tell them what to build. And no matter what I tell them, they will end up making the wrong call at some point.
So wait, that's what like a product manager said or the client said.
That I don't know exactly the it was a business person.
Okay.
I don't know what's like if it was a CEO of some sort or but it was a
Mm-hmm.
business person, right? Not a non-technical person
Mm-hmm.
at all. And that's what this person essentially believes. It's like, no, I have to tell the devs what they need to build. Wow.
Yeah, I mean that is a broken relationship
Yeah.
between, yeah, and either that person, needs to learn to trust their people better, or their people need to be better at trying to understand what the person's saying and demonstrating that they can, or some version of both. I mean, there's clearly in that case everyone's not working as a team, and like,
Yeah. Oh, and I do think it's also comes from, if you get the developer, the type of developer who's only interested about the technical side of things and they are not listening the business, not trying to understand what business goals you're trying to accomplish, then I could see why, a business would say, yeah, I don't trust those guys. I mean, I have to tell them exactly what they need to build because they're too busy thinking on the technical stuff, but not thinking about what the business actually needs.
yeah. Yeah, and man, the problem there is that like, so you've got these different parts where like one is like keeping an eye on is the actual technical part, and then you have like keeping an eye on what the business needs and the business strategy and like goals. And then
Right.
you have the part where you actually dilute that to specific. So that's strategy. Then you have the part where you dilute it to specific things that you're going to try to achieve. And what happens if this one doesn't work, but this one does? That's tactics.
Right.
And like, what you end up with, like someone has to own that middle part where you break out the features and figure out what the actual tactics for getting stuff done are. And if the devs aren't owning that at all, I mean, and it's probably like the salespeople and the business people aren't owning that at all. You either get like no one owning it, and then you get someone like that like feels like they have to step in and grab hold of it. Like there's nothing else there.
So, what do you think, or do you guys on the call think should be the glue between the two universes there to make sure that somebody's owning that and bridging this gap? What are the thoughts there?
You just got to do it. The devs probably do have to do it though, right? Maybe not all the way. Maybe there is a room for really solid BAs there, um, or that's the role that the product owner is meant to fill in a lot of times. But I mean, first of all, I've never realistically worked at a place where even when I have had product owners and BAs, they've been more than happy to kind of share those responsibilities because they're completely overburdened with other stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and some of that stuff absolutely needs insight from the tech in order to make those decisions. So I think, yeah, I think it is kind of on developers to at least be open to working in those areas.
Agreed.
And honestly, it shouldn't be that it shouldn't feel that unusual for us, because like when you're learning programming and training, sure, a lot of all the like individual program like problems, they might tell you exactly what to do, but at some point you had project work where you were just told, here's what we're trying to achieve, and then you did it, and you worked on coming up with the features and how to do it and what exactly it should look like. So why that you were trained to do that, no matter whether you went through a boot camp or college or whatever, or self-taught.
Right.
So why did you stop? Right?
True. And
Yeah.
there's one thing that I've also heard. Well, I know from my own experience and from hearing other developers, seeing how they operate, and hearing from like non-technical, business folks, the way they talk about developers, where we developers have this tendency of start problem solving right in the middle of somebody else's thought, as the person is like explaining what the thing is. In our heads, we are already making up our minds, okay, this is the best implementation, this is the best strategy, and the person's not even done
Mm-hmm.
with explaining what the thing is. And we are already doing that. We're already thinking about, okay, whenever this person stops talking, I already know what to say. And that's terrible. And I know that I've done that for years. I've been trying to like tame that, and I've been hearing that from other folks where they say, yeah, developers, they don't listen to the end. And
So
that's I think,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No. So I would propose bumping that up on the list of uh, communication techniques even before we stating the problem, to shut the fuck up and listen. Yeah, that's point number one.
Well, yeah, but and that's the other thing, George. There are the kinds of people that they are already problem solving, and they will interrupt the person who's talking. It's like blah, blah, blah. And there are the others who are like, oh no, I'm polite. I'm gonna wait for the person to finish, and then I'll replace the person's idea with my own. It's like, well, you're not getting the point. So here's something I think you relate to it. This was one lesson that I've learned from improv classes, right? Listen to the end. Do not try to start already making up your own scene before the previous person is done, because you don't know where that person is coming from. You're not understanding. And this is another thing that I heard a couple of days ago. People will say yes to you when they are understood, not when they understand you. And that flip is like, yes, that is very true. So we first have to listen the person to make sure that we understand the person. We have to let the person know, I think I understood you. Let me rephrase or restate or whatever. Let me tell you my explanation of what you just said to make sure that I know where you're coming from, and then develop the idea, right? You either build on top of the person's idea, or you say, look, I understand exactly what you were saying. These are the trade-offs, or the challenges that we may encounter. Here is another idea that we could also try, right? So, but you're working with that person. And what I know from, from the way that I used to operate until not too long ago, and the way I see other people doing, it's like we're not listening. We are just, yeah, that person is doing it all wrong. That person does not know what she or he is talking about. Here's how we should do it. And that's, nobody likes that.
I'll even build on that. Um, so going back to improv, in improv, like the gold standard exercise that you kind of get started with is the yes and exercise,
Yeah.
where you have to listen to the other person. You let them talk, and then you take whatever idea, whatever crazy, usually stupid idea they put out there, and then rather than, it's very specifically yes and, but not yes but, because you're accepting their idea and then adding to it. You're building on it, and embellishing from there. And I think that kind of serves several purposes, but how it relates to communication is, is especially at like these early stages that we're talking about, where you're just kind of flushing out the idea and build team building and brainstorming, one of the big things is to establish trust within your team, with the client that they do that. One of the best ways to do that is to collaboratively work on an idea together. And if you say you accept their idea and then, you know, take some and then build on it, there you go, trust established. You
Yeah.
can, you know, you have an alternate idea, take it in your notes. You should be taking notes and propose it later on. And be like, okay, I actually had another take on this that I wanted to suggest. Now that we've fleshed that out, right?
And this is, when I brought up, yes and with another developer a couple of months ago, I explained the idea. Okay, whatever the idea is, you have to say yes and build on top of it. And then the guy was like, well, can it be like yes, but? I said, well, try it, right? And the problem is, as soon as you say yes, but, the other person already knows that you're going to essentially say, you are wrong, my idea is better, or here are all the reasons why you are wrong. It has that connotation, right? When you do yes, and you are willing to work with that person's idea, right? And even if you completely like uh, do not believe in the person's idea or do not agree or whatever, if you say yes and we are going to work together trying out that idea, identify pros and cons and take it from there, the person is listening, right? Because you're leaning in. Another technique that I actually got from the improv coach that I've also been trying to apply to say a scrum team is, instead of saying yes and, I say yes because. And then you have to essentially justify what the person just said. So like on an exercise with the product owner, if the product owner gives you the user story and then you say yes, right, you're accepting that user story because, and then you give your interpretation as to why that is important. And then at that point, the product owner might say, well, no, that's not at all what I meant, right? So maybe I need to rephrase things. Or maybe it's like, yeah, that's not what I meant, but I like where you're going. Let's keep talking, right? Or third thing is like, yes, that's exactly what I meant. So it encourages this kind of like communication between the two, as opposed to just, okay, this is the story, go and do whatever, right?
Yeah. And I'll comment on this. Like the other way that the yes and versus yes but thing, the other way that it works is that, and of course this is all kind of vague and imprecise, but it does, you kind of end up getting a gut feel for it, is when you do if you say, if like one person establishes, again we're going to improv, so it's like in the scene where one person establishes that I'm in the kitchen, I'm cooking everything, it's a mess, and you're coming in with yes, but the president is coming today, and we got to cook for them. I mean, like that's now made it okay. What you're saying, sure, I accept it, but what this scene's really going to be about is the president coming, which is like you could still introduce the president, but keep it to be about the cooking and the craziness and accepting their idea and having the other thing just be an aspect of it. And if it drifts into other territory naturally, then so be it. But I mean, like again, that's how you accept an idea. That's why they're very very specific about yes, but like yeah, you're still adding an idea, but just the way the language works, you're also shifting the focus to that idea, which is
Correct.
not what you want to do.
Yeah.
I want to throw something in here.
Yeah.
Um, I had a talk with somebody who was giving me advice a long time ago about this very subject about yes and versus yes but.
Yeah.
And I asked him, was like, but how am I supposed to, how can I get over this habit, right? He says, well, it's easy, John. You don't show your butt in public. Every time you think about it, think to yourself, don't show your butt in public. And it seems silly, but it worked really well.
I, I'm writing that down. I love that. Thanks for sharing
Yeah.
that, John. I love it.
Um,
That's great.
Uh, let's drop back to more just like communication techniques, um, and I mean I'll put one right up on the board. Like actually document stuff. Like do it. Like actually write. It's bizarre to me how many people are shy about writing, given that you're at a text editor all day, on Slack all day, talking to people on chat all day. You keep up with all your friends on Facebook or whatever, writing stuff. Yet when it comes to, I mean, like, why is anyone still a bad writer? For one thing, but like when it comes to writing, um, something for your project, people get really, really shy about it, and that to me is very strange, especially when that person will have no problem like writing a big paragraph or two up into Slack. It's like you're sending this, you're communicating to the same people by putting in the read by putting stuff in the README. Like, just take the time and write it, and right there, like you'll be better. You'll be better than the average just by writing some documentation. And I do wonder if some part of that is people just like we never really no one really ever gets trained on how to write documentation, so no one even like has a skeleton for a README file. Um,
Hmm.
and there are actually, like, if you search online, like there are like skeletons for READMEs, like how to write a good README file that I've been to and I've like argued with people on about and stuff like that. But there are, even
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally relate to that. Like, I actually had a note to talk about this as well. Like, when you have team members that are crazy smart, but talk way too fast, right? And that, I mean, it may work great for the individual because the individual is like 4 or 5 steps ahead of everybody else, but it doesn't help with the team, right? So coaching such folks to actually slow down when they're communicating with others to make sure that the others can actually catch up and move at a faster pace altogether, that's being a big thing. And getting them to write more helps with that, right? Because some people are like, as they are thinking, they're like bursting out the words without making a lot of sense. It's very, like, for me, extremely hard to catch up. I have to say, dude, just slow down. I am not that smart. I am not following you. Slow down, right? And getting them to just getting to the practice of actually writing it down. You're gonna have to slow down your thoughts to put it on paper or type it, whatever, but it should help you be a better communicator. So that kind of practice has been also helping, with like team efforts.
But I would almost call bullshit that someone's so smart and they're like throwing out so many thoughts. That's not why people throw out lots of thoughts. Nobody has that many good thoughts that they're willing to stand by, right? Especially within a given conversation. Like you're throwing out tons of shit because you're it's an insecurity thing almost, right? You feel like you've got to get everything out right now and you don't know which is the important bits.
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't say it. I wouldn't see like that with some of the folks I've worked with, where it's more like they're so excited about sharing what they have, what they know, what they think it's beneficial to the team, and they are like almost like speaking as fast as they are thinking. So at that point, they're trying to get everything they have, like it's all up here, guys. Check this out, and it's not working, right? Because they are speaking to be understood as opposed to have somebody else understand what they are saying. I don't know if that makes sense. It's like another reason why I've been telling people, the reason why I think I'm a slow learner is because as I'm learning anything, I'm slowing it down in my mind, thinking, how am I going to explain this to somebody else? Right? So if I'm receiving a message from somebody who talks really fast with a lot of smart ideas, I'm thinking, how can I break this down to explain it to somebody else? At that point, I lose the person because it's like I'm busy breaking it down. I hope that makes sense.
No, I think it does. Um, yeah.
But Claudia,
Go ahead.
I'll throw something in here for you.
Okay.
Um, Sometimes a really effective technique to deal with people who, just kind of they have some idea, they're just, it's kind of erupting from their head, right?
All right.
Um, Take notes. Like tell the person, oh, slow down a little bit. I want to take notes on this, right? Very few people will get upset about that because, like, you're recording their idea, right? But it forces them to slow down so you can write it out,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
It's just a very complimentary way of getting people to slow down and you know take their time about things. Um,
Yeah, I get.
that's just something and I know it's probably a little harder for you, for people who are communicating in a language that's not their first language, right? There's always a little bit of impedance mismatch, right?
Yeah.
Like the concepts aren't quite the same.
Exactly. It's so yeah, thanks for bringing that up, John. Like with whenever I'm starting with a new clients and they're like feeding me in as to what their company is all about, what their industry is all about, usually like a couple of minutes in, I tell them, look, stop. I have to apologize in advance. I'm pretty sure you guys are saying a bunch of stuff that you are taking for granted because you've been in the business for a long time, because you were born here, you just know these things for a fact. I will be stopping you to ask what certain words are. I may sound stupid because those may be words that is like, what the heck? You don't know what that word is? Like, yeah, I don't. I'm sorry, but I don't. And like, I will throw something out there. The first time I heard somebody say, oh, blah, 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 you were sandbagging. In my mind, I had no idea what that person meant because I was thinking of a sandbag. That's what came to my mind, a sandbag. Like uh, the thing that I was just telling you, you said that I was sandbagging. What the hell does that mean? And of course, depending on the situation, if I don't feel like safe saying, hey, slow down, what does that thing mean? I have to write it down, live with it until I can actually take my time and go figure out what does that thing actually mean, right? And of course, working in environments where you have a lot of people who were not born here, you have to take those things into account. I've seen myself in situations where it's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm hearing every single word. I can spell them out, but I do not understand in this context what those things mean, right?
Yeah. Also, no one's like, even the U.S. is a big place. No one's born here where you are. Either way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, well, and it's a funny thing because like not too long ago, one of the words that came up in a conversation, at a sprint planning or something, was there was a something called a deck board and something called a fascia board. I'm like, okay, I know how to spell fascia. What the hell is a fascia board? But I didn't ask because everybody else in the room was like nodding their heads. I'm like, okay, I'm the only one who doesn't know, and I just don't feel like asking the question. It wasn't until a couple of like weeks later during sprint review that other stakeholders, there was somebody in the audience who was born here, raises his hand and asks, what is a fascia board? So that made me even rethink when I'm preparing for a like sprint review, sprint demo, or whatever. I always put up visual like images for things that maybe some people are taking for granted, others are not at all. So like in that context, we were building like decking boards, which had or not decking boards, deckings, where you would have deck board, fascia board, railing, post jacket, all these things. It's like I, whenever I heard those things in the sprint planning, I couldn't see that. I didn't have an image pop in my mind. So I got stuck on that. Whatever the PO was talking about those things, I was stuck thinking, what the heck is a fascia board? What is a post jacket? So as I was preparing for a sprint review, what did I do? Well, just go grab photos where when I'm explaining that to the stakeholders, I have an image there, because if somebody does not have those images popping in their minds, it is right there. They're not getting stuck in those things, right? So those are communication techniques that I also use that I find beneficial.
Yeah, and that actually goes to one of my big communication techniques, and also the documentation thing. As you're going running into these terms, write down the glossary for them. Actually, write down the definitions.
Yeah.
Um, 9 times out of 10, nobody's bothered to do that. So you can at least contribute that to the project right away, and they're usually very very grateful for that, because even the people in the industry are usually like ready to admit that it's hard. Um, and they're and even if they already do have a glossary, your glossary is better because it's what you need to understand it. And at some point, you could probably merge a lot of it with the glossary that already exists to add to it. Um, Again, really, really big deal thing as far as establishing trust and saying like, no, I am paying attention, and I can contribute value right away. I haven't written a line of code, but you've already created a glossary for them, which is something that they've sort of kind of intended to do for a long time and never got around to.
Right.
And to that kind of, that goes in your documentation, and there is so much power in having the documentation actually be started and have something in it versus having nothing in it, and then you're telling people to go add stuff to the documentation and they don't because they don't want to start it. So having a place to put all those things is very powerful. If nothing else, stating the core, when you state the core problem, you put that in the documentation. You do the glossary, you put that in the documentation, and now you're building it out, and now people don't feel weird about adding to it.
Right. Yeah, I like it.
Yep.
So I'll throw one more thing in here.
Sure.
In terms of, every project, every company, every industry has their own little jargon to things. If I'm in a situation like you were describing where, you didn't know what a fascia board was, um, one of the things I'll do, even if I know what the word is, if I think there are like junior developers who don't know or somebody who's new to the project, I'll ask, because it's a lot easier for me as the senior guy, on the project who's been there to ask the question than it is sometimes for somebody who's new or junior to speak up. And I found that's really helpful sometimes.
Yeah, that's
Because,
a great point.
we all have this need to present, a level of competence and confidence and everything. And, people can be a little worried about, uh, blowing that by asking a dumb question. And so, I care so little about what people think, I'll just ask any question.
That's great. Yeah, that's very thoughtful of you. That's cool. Uh, yeah. Oh, the other question I was gonna ask you guys is, I've been hearing from a number of non-technical folks that one way they found that is beneficial for them to improve their communication with developers is to learn any kind of programming language. What do you guys think of that?
No. I don't know. I don't see it. Like, because the most frustrating, it would be so annoying if someone started trying to describe their business in terms of variables and like arrays. Uh, I think the developer has a lot easier time learning at least something about businesses than that person would there. Yeah.
I don't know though. I think if somebody's interested in it, if that's their idea, um, that's actually a good thing. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to people. Like, if they don't have any interest in it, stay away. But, I end up dealing with a lot of people who aren't software developers, but, they're Excel jockeys. You know, they're writing code. They may not realize it even, but they're writing code. And whatever you can do to build a common vocabulary with the users, the folks you're working with, I think that's a good thing. And you know, some of the best developers I've worked with are people who decided they wanted to learn enough about coding to talk to the coders and ended up becoming software developers,
Mhm.
which it is a little bit close to how I became a software developer, to be honest with you. So,
Okay.
but yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't necessarily go out and encourage people who have no interest in it to do it because, yeah, that's gonna not turn out well.
Yeah, I personally don't like that approach. Don't think it's beneficial because at that point it's like, okay, what is the language that you would learn? Would it be a functional language, an object-oriented language? Would be a query language? How is that really helpful? And the way I relate to is, for example, when somebody meets me and start like working with me, and they learn that I'm from Brazil, to be nice to me, what do? They learn how to say good morning in Portuguese. How are you in Portuguese? That's great. It earns empathy. It gets us, it breaks the ice. The person cares about my background. That's awesome. But I shouldn't assume, or nobody should assume, that we are going to start communicating better because that person knows like three or four sentences in Portuguese. So it's the same thing. Well, yeah, I'm mostly a C# developer. So the business person should learn some C#, and that's going to improve our communication. Well, no, it may just help breaking the ice. Oh, yeah, that person is interested in learning a little more of my background. So that person cares about me. But now we are going to continue speaking English, not C#. So I've been like coaching folks more into, let's try to learn the level of English that we can actually communicate better, where we only bring like the business terms and the technical terms to a point where we have those pictures popping in our mind and we can have a clear communication that way, as opposed to, oh, this is what a functional language looks like. This is what a lambda expression or an expression tree or a regular expression is like. No. That would be like the similar situation of me being a sprint planning, and then the product owner says, good morning in Portuguese, and then I start like saying, oh, this is how you say that user story in Portuguese. This is how
Mhm.
you state that acceptance criteria in Portuguese. Is that really what we want to do? Is that how we're going to become more fluent in our collaboration? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's a fun example. Yeah, because I've worked with like teams of people in Ukraine who are Russian speakers. I grew up Russian speaking. I can speak Russian. It was a fun. I swear, I was like, yeah, I speak Russian. Well, we never did any. That did not come up in doing our work at all. Like,
Right?
yeah, it
Well,
was.
that's the thing. I think you can relate to that then. Say that
Yeah,
you have a Russian developer on the team, and that person is having a hard time understand the requirements in English. You could potentially explain to the person because you know where that person is coming from because you
hmm
are fluent in Russian. It's
right.
different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can see some of the gotchas a little better. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I don't. I encourage people who are working to like go through like the first half of a boot camp or something, just to learn what is up with development, what is development, what their developers do all day. It helps us have empathy, but not. I wouldn't say that's any more important than a developer taking and learning a little bit about sales, or designers learning, more
Yeah,
about, I don't know, what CEOs do. What do CEOs do? No one knows. Yeah.
yeah,
So I think it's more important for the context of understanding the culture as opposed to understanding the language. And what I
exactly.
mean by that is it's helpful to understand the culture of the people you work with. And that's true if we're talking about human culture. I've learned a lot in how to deal with people from different parts of the world. Because not everybody grew up in Texas. right? I mean,
I've never heard a
and I
Texan
think
say
it can
that.
be helpful.
Everyone's
You know,
from Texas, right? That's how it works in Texas.
I think it can really be helpful if the folks on the team who are interested learn a little bit about the culture of programming, not so much a language, right? But
Yeah.
just to under and part of understanding the culture is getting started with some sort of language. Um, I don't have the link handy, but I saw a demo of that somebody was building where they basically built a way for kids to learn how to program where
Scratch.
it took away all the compiler BS.
Hmm.
Basically, you learn Python, but you do it a line at a time.
Mm.
And it was, I thought that was super fascinating. It was, I thought about it. I might recommend it to people who, just want to get their feet wet in programming because the most frustrating thing in the world about programming is, the old joke about how, yeah, programming is like writing a book. If writing a book, if you forgot a comma on page 42, the whole thing turned into math, right? Just nonsense, which is how software development, with most programming languages works.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's all I'll say about that.
Sure. Yeah, I do like I remember years ago I looked into those like they're like software that people created to teach like kids how to program, or it's very visual where you can like teach them about loops and conditional structure so you can actually visually see, not necessarily learn the language. Oh, you need to end the sentence with a semicolon and you need braces. No, that doesn't matter, right? It's the visual, the popping that image in people's head. That's a technique that, heck, I've used to learn and improve my English, which is instead of like, okay, how do you say this word in English? And it's like, okay, I first think of the image of the word in Portuguese and then translate it over in English. That will only get you so far. When I started like looking around me and seeing something like the wall, and instead of thinking parede, which is the Portuguese word, I would try to think the word in English first. So when I see a bus going by, when I see a person, when I see the color of that person, trying to think of that in the English word, that's what really made me go far. So, well, how do you translate that into like a Scrum team? The same thing. If the product owner is telling me a user story, I really need to make sure that whatever the person is using, the nouns, the verbs, everything, they actually pop as images in my mind. When I get to that point, then I know that I can communicate more effectively.
That's actually the premise behind speed reading, you know.
Yeah. So yeah, I did take a little bit of speed reading exercises many years ago, and that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, yeah, I will say though, like, if the point is to get people familiar with culture, with the programming culture, which I can jive with, that's a that could sounds like it'd be useful. Then maybe don't learn to code. Maybe go read Cathedral and the Bazaar. Some,
I am unfamiliar with that book. What is that book?
oh, that's Eric S. Raymond's. It's a big. It's one of his big. I think it's what he's most. I mean, he's known for a bunch of stuff, but like that was his book that he's mostly known for, and it's kind of about, a little bit about the history of Linux and the massive open source model
Hmm,
where like lots of people contribute and how the heck that even works, and
okay.
yeah, and historically what happened with it and so on.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, I will say, like, so many people now, like, don't even know programming culture, what it is. Like, for real, and I don't mean, like, 4chan, the terrible internet stuff, but, like, so few people, like, understand, like, the backgrounds of like, Xerox and DARPA and Bell Labs and how all that feeds into what we're doing now and all, like, you know people haven't read like JD Licklider's papers, and it's like, man, like, that's not hard stuff to read. You can go read. You can go read it. There's like very accessible books on this stuff that that really like will ground you in kind of the history of what it is we're doing, and kind of how we're trying to do it, right?
Okay.
Like people don't learn history anymore, and it's frustrating because it's very important.
Right.
Yeah.
True.
And actually, as far as how it relates to communication, I've always found that like relating something to history, but like if you do have that, if you have done that work, you do have that background, you know that stuff. Being able to kind of drop facts about that, like in relevant places, you know, you're teaching the other person something. It really establishes a sort of authority that I mean most people just wish they had, and you get it for very cheap. Like it's a
Right.
matter of reading a couple books that are should probably be interesting anyway. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, that is easy, I guess, for the readers, but I know that, reading is not something that works for some people. Um,
Audible.
Audible is
I don't read. I just do Audible all the time.
really, I do a mix
Yeah.
of both, actually.
Yeah. I just I've got the little kids. I don't have time to like sit down and
Yeah.
the book and just read.
Okay.
So it's, yeah. Anytime I'm going somewhere Audible or when I'm cleaning the house at the end of the night after everyone goes home, just cranking Audible into my ears.
Sure. As you're listening to audiobooks like that, do you stop to take notes? How do you process that information?
Yeah, I'm trying to like get better at taking notes. So what I've been doing is just setting a bookmark every time there's a note. Every time I want to do a note, which and then presumably at the end of the book going back and re-listening to the bookmarks and transcribing that. That I've only been doing that for a couple months and have not had a ton of success with it. It's just kind of about how my schedule works. If I'm listening to stuff at the end of the day, then I'm going to go to sleep afterwards. I'm not going to sit down and do some transcribing. And I need to do better about that and find time for it because yeah, I'm. But honestly, I found just the act of stopping and actually pressing that button does make me remember stuff better that way as well.
Interesting.
Yeah. I
Okay.
wish there was a better approach. Audible has a shitty interface for it, but so does everyone else.
Right. Yeah, something that's
And actually, their interface for setting bookmarks is easy. That one's fine. Their interface for listening to a bunch of bookmarks that you've established is really bad. And like no matter what platform you're on.
mm,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, some a technique that I've been seeing from Derek Sivers. He reads like a ton of books, and what he does is for every book that he finishes, he posts to his blog like a summary in the shape of do this, do not do that. Like this is how he gets lessons out of it. Okay, I've learned from this book that you should do this, don't do that, don't do that. I'm like, that's a great way to just sum up what you've learned from that book so that you can recall. Because my problem, if I don't do something like that, is just to recall, okay, in which book did I get that and what were like the main lessons that I got out of that book. I need to write down in some form, otherwise it becomes a blur to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Right.
We've got 1 minute. I want to just throw out one more thing about documentation before we go.
Okay.
Um, obviously, I didn't get to go into diagrams, super useful, but and like especially if you're doing code challenges for places, I find like hardly and no one does this. It's such a huge advantage, but also in actual projects. When you do when you do your thing, your code challenge, you're going to turn it in for this new job you're applying for. In your README, first of all, make sure you write stuff in the README, put all the stuff we talked about, but have a section there called like interesting parts or something like that. And in there, guide the person about the parts that you want them to look at, which you think are the most interesting that they'll get the most from. Guide them through it because you want and if it's an actual project, do that anyway. Someone sitting down with your project, your just goals are slightly different than someone sitting down with a project. having a guide of being like, these are the parts that are really relevant to understanding the actual architecture and what we're going for. Look here, 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 and here, and notice this, and that other thing. That's hugely powerful. That's what people will be like a year into 2 years into a project and be like, oh, I wish that someone had told me X in the future. People knew the X, they just didn't write it down anywhere because they didn't have anywhere to write it down. So create a section to write that stuff down.
I like that.
Yeah. I have to drop off. Got another meeting starting.
Right.
This
Yes.
is cool.
Very cool. Thanks, guys. Everybody who joined in and chimed in.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Guys, have a good one and see you next week.